Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for staying this long. I know it's been a quick-fire afternoon, and we're hoping in this session, which you may have noticed from the programme is sitting between you and the drinks reception, even though we have some very serious things to say, we are actually also going to endeavour to entertain you, because each of my wonderful panel has brought some clips of their work and what they're involved in to demonstrate the theme of this session, which I'm thinking of in terms of relating it to the earlier session. This is the ecosystem that is required. Cultural change is the ecosystem in which any of these changes we've been talking about will take place. And I think the overwhelming question is, and certainly you can probably tell I'm slightly over 40, for women in the room of my generation, why are we still talking about gender stereotypes that we thought when, do you remember the British amongst you, equal pay legislation, anyone? That came in the 1970s when I was still at school, and I went forging off thinking, well, that's all taken care of, you know. When I finally leave school and get a job, I will get paid the same as all the men. And funny enough, what are we talking about in 2019? A big discussion has been emerging over the last couple of years about gender stereotypes. What is it about equal work that means you cannot get paid the same? What is it about all the debates we're having in the media about the body beautiful and how women are represented in a stereotypical fashion in the press that isn't changing? Because I seem to remember back in the 1970s, there were people out there trying to change that. So I suppose the debate tonight, and here we have some wonderful examples of women who are working in this sphere to, if you like, unpick some of the imaging, some of the content, some of the serious ways in which the way women are presented, the way gender, because we're also going to have a discussion about masculinity, which cannot be forgotten. If we're talking about changing cultural and behavioural norms, that involves men obviously as much as women. And we also have the LGBT plus all the other acronym story is part of the equation. I'm not sure in limited time we've got, we'll get onto that per se, but this is culture. This is a way of saying, why is the ecosystem still not fit for purpose? What is it about a world in which we're all connected by social media, we're all connected by images, videos, we can all watch the same YouTube videos. In many ways, the advertising world has got international too. What is it about images changing perhaps in the media and in advertising, which is creating new sorts of tensions with so-called traditional values? Because if you can see something in this country, you can see it elsewhere through different YouTube portals or elsewhere in different parts of the world where they're still playing cultural catch-up, you know. And I think we have one or two stories that we can probably address from the panel of individual women who forged ahead but still have to deal with expectations on an individual level as well as a community level with the families they come from. So that's enough from the outburst from me. You will see, I will make a very brief introduction to the panel. We have Iman Amrani, who's a multimedia journalist at The Guardian, and you may describe yourself when you comment exactly how you like. Georgia Arnold, next up, who is Senior Vice President for Social Responsibility with the Viacom International Media Networks. And for those who've not heard of them, as I hadn't before, it's, what is it, 200 media channels?
Yeah, MTV, Comedy Central, Channel 5, Nickelodeon.
Yep. Okay, and Georgia is also Executive Director of the Staying Alive Foundation, about which I think you'll be talking today. And last but absolutely not least, because we're going to start with her, is Rebecca Swift, who's the Global Head of Creative Insights for Getty Images. And by consensus, perhaps not your consensus, but by consensus, we agreed we'd start with Rebecca because you will have seen the wonderful pictures of women along this corridor and upstairs in the room where you were registering. And Rebecca, I hope, will start by telling us something about the background to those and what they represent.
Yeah, I think probably the best way to do that is actually to show you a video with very emotive music. So I don't know how I make that happen. Oh, it just happens. Oh, there we go. Please enjoy. I'll talk about it afterwards.
70% of women still say they do not feel represented in either media or advertising. You can't be what you can't see. Dove is proud of what we've done in our advertising, showcasing a broad diversity of women, but we know that it's not enough, and we know that we can't do it alone. That's why we've partnered with Getty Images and Girl Gaze.
What's so important about this particular campaign is that we've been able to highlight and photograph women and girls all over the world who don't generally get seen.
As image professionals, we have the responsibility to authentically reflect society and to help trigger social change. Project Show Us is the largest stock photo collection of women, created by women, to challenge beauty stereotypes.
We've already got over 5,000 images in the image bank, and each of the images has been self-tagged by the women themselves.
If I can break the stereotype and change it one photo at a time, I will do it as long as I can.
The skin condition, it was not perceived as beautiful. The beauty standards don't define me.
鳥さんのようにいくつになっても自分らしく輝いていられるその姿にとっても惹かれて鳥さんを選びました。
そして、毎日がハッピーであれば美しくなると思ってます。
In a country like India, if you're gay, if you're bisexual, people will instantly judge you. But Monisha, she doesn't care.
I want to see a lot of unity in women to come together, create an awareness.
We want to see people that look like us and more than anything being able to relate.
I don't see women that look like me with my complexion, with my hijab. People are like don't understand what it is like to be modern and trendy.
Quería mostrar al mundo mujeres que son seguras de sí mismas. Débora me ha ayudado con problemas de mi cuerpo.
Los medios no debería de lucrar con el que tú te sientas mal contigo. Aspiracional, el que tú te sientas bien contigo mismo.
I wanted to share with the world unique beauty.
I like for women to embrace their age and enjoy every time period of their life.
Мои родители, они меня заставляли быть более женственной.
Чем больше фотографий, которые разные женщины есть, фотографии видят много людей, тем лучше для нас, для всех.
Participar de projetos que se preocupem com as mulheres e com a diversidade.
A campanha ela é um passo para começar a romper esses padrões do que é o belo e como só houvesse um.
We're inviting you as media and advertisers to come and use this image bank so that we can represent a much broader view of how womanhood looks around the world today. Show us a world where all women and girls feel seen and represented.
Nos mostre mais mulheres que se pareçam comigo.
Покажите нам таких, как я.
私みたいな
Show us.
Show us.
Show us more women who look like me and you.
Right, very good.
Happened really was a wonderful collaboration between four companies. It was the ad agency who came up with the idea. It was Dove, who, as I'm sure you're aware, have a long legacy of work around how women are depicted and thinking about the self-esteem of females. And then Girl Gaze, which is an online community of young female and female-identifying photographers. And then Getty Images. And for those of you that don't know Getty Images, we're the largest global photo agency in the world. We're a massive platform. We have about 1 billion searches happening on our site every single year. And we have about 1.5 million customers that we work with worldwide. So we work with all the big brands, all the big media agencies, most of the, actually all of the global networks of advertising agencies. So we have a global platform that we can put photographers on, and we can show them. Now, the thing about working in my space, in my world, as opposed to some of the discussions we've been having today, which far more worthwhile to discuss. I mean, I'm thinking about creativity and whether the picture looks pretty or not, and does it work with this logo? These are the type of discussions that I tend to have on a day-to-day basis. But as I've kind of risen through the ranks of the photographic industry, I've realised that it is very male-dominated. I think anyone who works in my industry will know that you don't see many female photographers. And it's an interesting thing that happens in the world, in that, you know, some people, and I look at young Aman here, when I was Aman's age, I certainly wasn't thinking about what I could do for women around me. I was just thinking about, you know, how I could get on in life. Now I'm thinking, you know, now I've got to this age where I'm seen as the elder stateswoman of photography. You know, so I've been working a lot over the last 5 or 6 years thinking about representation and depiction and thinking about stereotypes and working in the advertising industry. That's where it all happens, and that's where it happens in a way that we don't even recognize a lot of the time. I've spent a lot of time looking at the history of advertising, and the imagery that I grew up with scares me and shocks me now, but at the time it was aspirational. It was imagery that we all kind of, you know, wanted to be like. So, you know, as I say, being part of this industry, there's a lot of discussion around stereotyping, and what you realise early on is that you can't do everything. You can't do everything. So I kind of decided that I was going to do the bit that I could do, and that was bring more female photographers into this industry, give them a place where they could earn a living, get recognised globally, and more importantly, and this is really, really key, is create that community. Because what I've seen and what I understand is that women love being around other women, and they love that sense of community. And so, when this project was presented to me, I was all in. You know, right from the very beginning. I still remembered the 2004 campaign for real beauty that Dove did, which everybody's still talking about, even though it's 15 years on. And I love the idea of what we were going to create. So most advertising imagery, you have no sense of who the woman is in the ad. She is a generic woman who represents something. She might represent something conceptually. She might be playing a role. Sometimes she's given a name, but a lot of the time it's not her real name. What we want to do with this group of images, with this collection of images, was bring the story of the women to the forefront. So we've created this bank, and this was the first 5,000 that we created. And it's only female photographers, it's only female models or female identifying models and photographers. They work together. The woman who was photographed decided how she was going to be photographed, what she would wear, where she would be photographing, where she'd be photographed, and she got to decide which images were selected. She also got to decide how her images were captioned. Now, if anyone's ever used online searches for images, it's very key, it's keyword and search data heavy. So the photographers themselves tend to use that search data to help their customers find the images. The women were in charge of all of this. And that's what makes this particular set of images more compelling, because you hear the stories, you understand how women perceive themselves, how they perceive their identities, and their emotions around that. And probably key, which is not the thing that we talk about a lot about this collection, there is no retouching. So none of the photographers were allowed to retouch the women in any way. And again, working in this industry, retouching has become such a de facto kind of skill. Retouchers tend to be, you know, employed more than photographers a lot of the time because of the work. So, you know, that's kind of how we created this collection. And really now my job is to educate all of our customers to use this type of imagery. This is a long way off for a lot of corporates. They are not quite ready to use this imagery yet. But if we can help them with data, we can help them with success stories, if we can tell them why it's a good idea if they should be using these images, then we can start kind of moving the visual language forward. And I don't expect to be able to change the whole world of photography with this one project, but as far as I'm concerned, it's a step in the right direction. And I'm trying to encourage all the female creatives I work with and the female photographers that I have contact with to keep making these little changes, so that over time we will see this change in advertising, especially, and in the media.
Well, thank you. I've just got one follow-up question, which is, in the earlier session, we were talking about the importance of having data to kind of leverage various actors by saying, look, if you are selling a product to a certain demography or your target audience is a certain demography of women, would you be able to find some way, I know it's small scale, but actually getting some qualitative as well as quantitative feedback from people who've seen these pictures?
Yeah, I mean,
or some kind of surveys, I don't know what's out there.
Well, I mean, again, my kind of academic part of my brain wanted to create quantitative data from this, because that seems to be the way you get things done in today's world. You know, whether you feel good about something doesn't seem to have as much bearing as to whether, you know, sales increase by 100%. That tends to make people make changes. And really, the reason we created this set in the way that we did, in that it had no male contact. It's a pure data set. So we can start comparing that to the rest of our collections. We can start comparing it to how men photograph women, or even how women photograph men. This is the start of creating that data. Because I've looked around for this data for nearly a decade, and it doesn't exist. I know there's a lot of data that says that stereotyping is a bad thing. I haven't seen any data that says if you go from a stereotype to a more diverse representation of women, then your sales go up by. That's the data I want to get my hands onto. And I think once we can start proving as a global photo agency that brands are more successful by using this type of imagery, then we can start kind of changing the story a bit more, I think.
Well, and certainly, I don't know if anyone in the group has ideas on how do you channel women as consumers to get those views through to advertisers. I mean, the Dove, the famous Dove campaign went so far with it, but I have to say advertising mainstream seems to have gone back the other way. We're all watching it or not Love Island, where it's the body beautiful in a very traditional way again. There's also the whole question of diversity in other ways. So
I think there's a place for Love Island. I think as long as Love Island's not the thing, I think that's part of the spectrum. It's, we need to have representation the whole way along. And
maybe
I think
that becomes the abnormality anyway, and everything else is normal. Georgia, over to you. Sorry to be doing a bit of a rush, but it's in the interest of getting a discussion going. So I suppose my main question to you, you also have got a clip to show us, but the main question is, why is MTV getting involved in sexual health issues and reproductive health issues? How did that emerge in the first place?
MTV is the brand.
And that's what Staying Alive is, yeah.
Yes, so I celebrated my 25th anniversary at MTV last week, so I too am an elder. And, back then, HIV was not only rampant, but most of the people who were dying were young people. And so for us, it seemed to be quite a natural fit for us to message about sex to our audience around the world. And we started off just working in Europe. Outside of the US, we were just in Europe, but we were growing massively. So that was the fit. Now, today, so 20 years on, or since we started doing this, we set up back then an independent foundation called the MTV Staying Alive Foundation. So I co-founded and I run it. And really our remit is to tell stories to save lives. And it makes sense because our audience are young people, and we do it through this vehicle called MTV Sugar. So MTV Sugar is a mass media behaviour change and demand generation campaign. It has been going for 10 years. We started in Kenya. Our lead actor was an unknown actor in Kenya called Lupita Nyong'o. It's her very first role. And now we've created 10 campaigns across Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa. We're just writing for Côte d'Ivoire and India as well for the first time. But I'll show you the clip, and then I can talk a bit more about it.
Number one source for what's hot, who's hot, where it's at.
I don't know why he keeps on calling. Obviously because he wants more of what you gave him last night. Money's not a condom. I mean, it won't save you from this disease. Say she saw you at the stage walking off a very gisty car. Oh, that was my uncle.
Oh, let me tell you something good doesn't even begin to describe last night. Come on, dance with me.
I hope to see you again.
We didn't use a condom last night again.
Told you, we need to talk. We need to get tested.
What?
You're negative.
Oh, thank you, Jesus.
She doesn't know about my status. She doesn't know about that. I just haven't found the right time to tell her. Tell her now. Baby has HIV. I forbid you!
Dad, you forbid me. I'm not a child.
And baby, you have no idea how this feels.
I'm gay.
And the world didn't end, did it?
Chatham, I didn't know about this. Hey, what the heck, bro?
If you back down now, Reggie, no one will respect you.
That's a brief look at what we do, and it's centered around a TV series, but as part of the campaign, we also produce a parallel radio drama. We have graphic novels that extend a lot of the messaging. We do, obviously, digital and social media, and then peer education on the ground. And that's really where we take the TV out of the living room and go into communities and schools to do a lot more intense work and where we see real change. When we started back in Kenya 10 years ago, we were very much centered on messaging around HIV, as you could see. And back then, you couldn't really talk about much more other than use condoms, get tested. But if you get tested, access to ARVs wasn't that great, and the medication wasn't that great back then, and myths and stigma. Today, we've really got, and I think also 10 years ago, HIV was very much dealt in a silo. Today, it's not dealt in a silo. So what you see when you watch MTV Sugar today is sexual reproductive health and rights. So we deal in Nigeria, we're just filming this at the moment, and we're looking at contraception, birth spacing, the difference between, you know, a young girl living in Kano or Kaduna in the north and a young girl growing up in Lagos. But we're also looking at the real innovation around HIV. So you've got PrEP and you've got self-testing, which is brilliant innovation, particularly if you're gay. We've got, you saw Reggie, who's come out as being gay. In series 2, he gets a boyfriend, which I was very, very excited about. And then in every single episode, we've always addressed gender-based violence and looked at toxic masculinity and the real roots of where that violence comes from. And so it's very much created for young people, but it's created with young people as well. So we do focus groups before we start, and young people are treated as an equal partner to all of our funders. So we are funded externally from MTV. My life would be very easy if Viacom paid for everything, but they give us lots of in-kind support. So the US government, the South African government, the Global Fund, the Gates Foundation, Children's Investment Fund Foundation, we get a lot of funding from them, but young people are equal. So I'll give you an example. I was in South Africa doing some work in the Western Cape, and I was asking for them to give us ideas about how we could storyline in the new series. And this young girl came up from the back of the room. Her school uniform, her skirt was wrapped up a little bit, several bands high, and her cardigan was off her shoulder. And she came up and she took the microphone and very confidently told me she knew exactly what the next storyline should be. So I said, fantastic. And she said, well, the next storyline, someone has to die. And I went, oh. I said, okay, well, how do they die? Do they die because of AIDS? Do they die because of violence? Is it a failed abortion? How do they die? And she just looked me up and down and she went, I don't care how they die. And I was like, okay. I said, well, if you're not going to tell me how they're going to die, then there is one thing you do have to tell me. You have to tell me, why do they die? And she said, well, MTV Sugar is all about our life. And if you're reflecting our life, well, in our life, someone always dies. And so it was because of that in the new series, or sorry, the first series we set in South Africa, that someone died. I was a bit gutted because the actor that we have, she's actually just joined our board. She's an amazing ambassador, an advocate for our work, but she died before her character died, but she's still doing brilliant work for us. The other thing about the work that we do is we give it away, we clear all the rights for it, and we give it away cost-free to anyone. So it doesn't matter if it's a school, an individual, or another broadcaster. So we have broadcast to 720 million homes around the world. We have 180 partner broadcasters who air MTV Sugar. And we target terrestrial broadcasters, particularly in the countries that we're working in or neighbouring countries. So SABC1, which is South Africa's BBC, they've just finished airing the new series, and they were rating on average 3 million people a week were watching it, which is 1 in 5 of the TV household population in South Africa. And 45% of those were the lowest income TV households. So we know that we've got the eyeballs on it. We've got 23 million views on YouTube. And what's interesting about that is with Reggie's story, who is our young guy who comes out as being gay, we can air that in South Africa, but we can't air that story in other countries across Africa where it's illegal to be gay. So we were faced with a dilemma about what did we do. So we created 2 versions. He's still gay in the Pan-African version, but we don't focus on his sexuality. But when we go on YouTube, the only story you see is the one where Reggie is coming out about being gay. And so it was very interesting from series 1 to series 2 how the homophobic comments, which A, were moderated by our audience, but B, really dropped off in series 2, not because I think people are suddenly fantastic, it's all okay to be gay, but actually I think we've sensitized them to the point where they know that Reggie isn't going to suddenly change his sexuality. And I guess the last thing I'd say is about impact. And impact is, for us to keep on getting the funding that we're getting, is really important to show. And the World Bank did a randomized cluster study in Nigeria. And they gave vouchers for HIV testing to youth-friendly testing centres to the control and the treatment group, and they did biomarkers for chlamydia as well. What it showed was that young people who watched MTV Sugar, double the number got tested for HIV than those who didn't, and chlamydia dropped by 58% amongst the MTV Sugar watchers as well. And they've just done some cost-benefit analysis. Now, you in this audience will understand this far better than I do, but I do know these numbers are really good. So what the World Bank are telling us is that for every dollar invested in MTV Sugar, conservatively, that you'll see $75 worth of health benefits, but actually on the upper end of the scale, they're saying it's 150 times the value of that $1 you'll get back by investing in MTV Sugar.
That's amazing. Wow.
Thank you.
I've just got one follow-up question, which is on the production teams. You said you've involved the young people themselves. What about women behind the camera, women directors? How have you got their input involved over the period you've been talking about?
I think it's really interesting working in developing countries because some are more developed than others in terms of media. So when we started in Kenya, we did have an only male directing team, and that's because we weren't being given any opportunities to sort of even evaluate whether the female directors were good enough. If we go back to Kenya, which I am desperate to do, by the way, that will be a priority on my list. But in South Africa, we had an amazing female director called Tishwe Zikubu, who's done some really challenging work, not just on MTV Sugar, but generally in South Africa around LGBT issues. And in Nigeria, we have Tope Ocean, who is our lead director, who's a woman, and her sister Bosse is producing the show. They're phenomenal. And then behind this and in front of the camera, well, behind and in front of the camera. So actually one of our actresses in South Africa, I went down on set to visit them and I saw her as a runner to the director of photography. So when she wasn't working as an actress, she was a runner as well. So we really look to try and see everyone in front and behind the camera and just try and raise up talent where you find it.
So you're looking for the talent rather than saying we must have a woman to do this, but how does that change the narrative, do you think? I mean, we're talking in the overall session about how do you change the storyline. It obviously does have an impact, but how
it really does. I mean, I think particularly for us, some of the storylines are really traumatic. The storyline of where this character dies, she has a transactional relationship. He is raping her on the regular, and eventually she dies because of that relationship. And I used to watch the rushes every day. I'd come into work and I'd watch what was filmed the day before, and there was a point where I'm phoning up, speaking to the actor to make sure she's okay and getting the support she needs. But having a female director is really beneficial. There's an empathy there, right? And particularly Tishue has her own experiences, which she brought onto camera as well. So I think where we can, it's always sort of our priority to make sure that we can connect those real life stories and those real life experiences with the people who we work with.
That's very good. Right, Iman, thank you for sitting here patiently. So we've heard about the potential to change advertising and the force for good that YouTube can be, but I'm also aware, as you are doubtless as a video journalist, how YouTube and the fact it's everywhere on everyone's phone and other platforms also exist, I know, can also be a rather negative force. So how do you see using social media actually to change this cultural ecosystem we've been talking about for the good, to actually prioritize, you know, the really beneficial changes and get rid of the old style sexism or, you know, homophobia and all these other ills around us? There is a lot out there which can actually reinforce those values. I mean, just look into the world. I've spent my life in the world of politics. Well, just look at YouTube videos on politics. They're not a very pretty sight. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I guess I'll start with what the project is that I've been working on at The Guardian recently. I do lots of things for The Guardian. Being a millennial, you've got to be a jack of all trades, so I do a bit of everything. And I've done a series recently about modern masculinity. And it's quite interesting. Lots of people have come to me and said, oh, I've watched your series on toxic masculinity. And I go, actually, I don't use the word toxic masculinity once in this series. It's just modern masculinity. And I think that we talk a lot about women and the stereotypes around women, but we have got the same stereotypes around men as well. And I wanted to do a series which would kind of pull the conversation away from the really kind of politicized and polemic ends of a spectrum where the conversation seems to be very, very far on the right and being quite kind of toxic, or so far, I would say on the left, to a point where it almost feels like in some spaces all men are evil and they're rapists, and so of course I think there's a space where toxic masculinity can be talked about, but in order to have progressive conversations that move forward, I think it's really important to try and make there be a space where people feel like they can come and speak without being judged or attacked. And so often we see panels, say, for example, on television, where they try to balance everything out, and in doing that, they get all these extremes, which mean you never really hear normal people. You never really hear like the experience of people just on a day-to-day, which isn't highly politicized. And I'm going to show a clip from one of the episodes that I did, but I felt that in this series, what I wanted to do was amplify the voices of people who don't really get access to platforms in the media. And in this particular episode, I wanted to speak to young men from South London. Some of them are black, but I also wasn't trying to overly racialise this either. And I think often we speak on behalf of, you know, young Londoners when we're talking about knife crime and violence and mental health, but we don't let them speak for themselves. And when you do, it's very rushed. It's like a 30-second segment and nothing really gets said. So what I was trying to do here was, allow people to speak in their own way and then put it on YouTube. So I guess we'll put the clip up. Yep. This is a bit of a way in, but yeah, from here.
It is not what you see on TV, not what you see in the magazines. Like, it's not like having the best figure, having all the females, or smelling the greatest. It's about integrity, about being yourself, doing the right thing when no one's there.
Being a man and being masculine is like, so being able to be like caring and have self-awareness of the people around you and the world around you as well.
What are the things that you think will like make young people kind of stressed out, especially young boys? What do you think are like the main things that people get stressed or worried about?
Society and what they think that young boys have to be or what they have to do. I think it's just society that makes people like anxious, and it kind of like sends them into like a dark place where they don't know what to do. They don't want to depend on someone else to tell them what to do, but then again, they don't know what to do.
Young men like me and Fernando might be scared to try and fit into society as well, like people judging them by how they look and how they act. I think that would definitely be something which young people would be quite nervous of.
Am I going to fit in? Am I going to be able to get friends? At the end of the day, it's just about being who you are and not what people are trying to force you to be.
But it does not mean you can react like that. Listen. Everyone gets so uptight and excited and everything happens. Listen, I saw him go, he didn't try to hurt you, he just got a bit too excited, but you shouldn't react like that. Listen, all you say is look at each other, shake hands, apologise for both going a bit hard. You two, right, go play. Come on.
FBB uses football as a way of reaching out to young people, and there are similarly professional players who use their platform in the sport to speak on issues like mental health.
I feel like Danny Rose is a good role model. It's because he suffers from mental health like me, but he kind of like uses football to get away with it, or get away from it. So that, yeah.
What are his kind of issues? I'm not sure about.
I think it's kind of like anxiety and depression, and I have anxiety, so it's kind of like it's nice to have someone who can speak about it, so I don't have to be scared when I talk about my mental health. I play football to get anxiety as well.
You play football?
Yeah. Football's kind of like however much time I'm playing, it's just that much time away from the world and just enjoy football.
Yeah, it's a good release of frustration. I go gym.
Yeah.
Whenever I get anxious, I talk to my mum because she always helps me out. Every time I'm anxious and if I've got something on my mind which I need to spill out, my mum's always there for me. So.
That's really good. It's, you know what it is? There's a big thing about finding like the things that make you feel better in a moment. I mean, you'll laugh, yeah, but I get my nails done and I'm stressed because then it means I can't be on my phone because they've got my hands. So I've just got to like zone out and be like, okay, take my hands and get my nails done, which is very different to football, but you know what I mean? We've all got our own things.
At this point, I can't help but...
I'll stop it there if you want. Oh gosh, there's my face. We can get that off the screen. Okay, so basically what I was trying to do is, like I say, get young men to come and speak in a way that feels natural to them. It's so difficult for them to speak on camera and speak to a journalist, and they know it's going to go in The Guardian. But what we managed to do with this series is go and speak to lots of different guys who've been through all different kinds of complicated challenges in life, and the response we've had has been really, really great. I think there is an image of The Guardian that it's going to tell you how you should go about things, and it's going to tell you that this is the good way of doing things and this is a bad way of doing things. And often it makes the conversation inaccessible for some people who maybe don't have the language, you know, they've maybe not been to university, they're not used to having those conversations about gender. And so what I was trying to do here is just make it more open. And I think that when you start from that point, that's where you can move forward. So yeah, that's what I've been trying to do here.
Well, thank you. What struck me is you'd obviously built up quite a strong level of trust with those boys. I can just imagine if somebody like me had turned up on, you know, with a microphone saying, "Now then, boys, tell me about your life." You wouldn't get anything like the quality of the responses they'd obviously thought about it. So I'm interested, how much time did it take you, you know, turning up there, talking, how did you arrange it? Did you have to talk to their, you know, football team manager, or did you just show up one day with it and say, "Hi, can I talk to your boys?" Or how did you build that level of trust?
So this particular video, there is a bit of a disclaimer at the beginning. I do outside of my work, I do outreach work. So I've done sessions with these kids. This is a great organisation, Football Beyond Borders, and it was quite easy for me to go and do sessions teaching the boys about the media. So lots of young boys want to be footballers. Well, they're not all going to be footballers, but there are lots of other jobs around football. You could be a football journalist, you could be an agent. So it's kind of using the framework they've got, going, actually, I can plug in, I can come and teach them about, you know, social media and getting into journalism. And so I'd done that, not with the specific boys who'd spoken then, but I'd built a relationship with them. And then as a journalist, I tried to build relationships with people so that I can send my previous work and go, don't worry, I'm not going to jump down your neck. I'm not one of those journalists. I'm going to try and be really non-confrontational and let you get your point across. So we had a bit of a background there already.
That's good.
In
Well,
that
it's
one.
also as if you're conscious of, you talked about the stereotype of being a Guardian journalist, how people see you. It almost sounds to me as though individually we're responsible for our own images as well. If you can see people stereotyping you, particularly if you're in a position of influence or you're perceived to be, is actually make it easier for them to engage so that their stereotype of you is also broken down at the same time as we're looking at these young boys in a different way. I mean,
it's just about having conversation, I think, in a different way. Yeah. So when, I think in one of the videos I said, so frequently I've been asked, why would a woman do a series on masculinity? And I think, why would you not? Surely we're supposed to be living in a world where we all get on with each other. And I did say in one of the videos, like, I don't really want to sit at home or, sit in the office and write as a journalist about being a woman or being Muslim or being Algerian or just about my identity. Yeah. Being a journalist for me is such a great job to have, and I'm so lucky to have it because I'm curious about the world and I want to go out and meet people and talk to them about their experiences and challenge my own ideas. And if I think as a woman or as a millennial, whatever, I've got all the answers, what really is the point in any dialogue? What is the point in anything, really? So I think what was really great about doing this series as a woman was I had to go, okay, I'm not going to come and tell you what I think here. I'm just going to listen and try and nudge it in a direction where we can find solutions to the things that you're talking to me about. And that was challenging, but also really positive, both professionally and personally.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. Right, well, we are sitting here between your drinks receptions, so I've been told we've got 5 minutes. Is that possible? Would the panel, are you staying for the drinks reception? Would you be open for, further chat upstairs over a glass? Great. So if everyone could just identify themselves very quickly and make it zappy. I think we already have a row there. We have somebody on the front row, so who's circulating the microphones? Yes, the lady in the row over here. Stefan, hello, white jacket, because I think there's two of them. Oh, and then we'll come to you at the front, if that's right.
First of all, this is the most important session of the whole forum. Because culture change is the most difficult challenge we face if we're going to change the world, and we're going to change the world. My name's Kitty Chisholm. I'm COO of Boardwalk Leadership. We do consultancy in inclusivity. I'm also a professional historic motor racing photographer. Wow. I'm 73. I was a mother and a worker in the 70s.
And you still hadn't got
So I have a different perspective.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what I now do is study how to change brains.
Ooh,
and that's what I think has been missing. And you've provided some of the answers. Legislation is necessary. Policies are necessary. Rules are necessary. Education is necessary. None of it is enough unless you find a way of grabbing the body and the brain and getting people to want to change and rewire themselves, which is actually possible, but that's another story. And if only we could find the stories and the language and the pictures to weave into all the serious stuff that you mentioned about what's happening earlier, I think we have to start from there. We have, and you are the industries that can make this happen. So I've been using an advert, I think it was devised in Indonesia for a shampoo firm, which is about how women and men are seen differently and stereotyped, but differently, for years, in training programs. And it makes people go, oh! So I'm sorry, this was a bit of a rant, but I'm so grateful to you for what you're doing. Thank you.
Okay, was it the lady next to you? I'm sorry. Very good. If not, in the microphone, oh, you've got one already.
Yes, so Stephanie, I work in diversity and inclusion, and I used to work in the beauty industry. I was often told within the executive in the beauty industry that people didn't want to see normal people on advertising because you do want that aspirational piece. So I just wanted to hear your views on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is the obstacle that I come across a lot. It's this folklore that has emerged around advertising, which really goes back to the 1950s, and when we first started to see that very aspirational style of imagery that was used to sell products. At that time, there was a lot of research that was done around. If you used an image of a sexy lady and you put her next to a car, then it would help sell cars. And, the research didn't actually develop much beyond that. And so you had a whole generation of people who created advertising who believed in that very old data. But then you had the kind of critics of advertising who were saying, that's not right, you shouldn't be doing it. But they were kind of in a vacuum over here. And then there was very, very powerful male advertising creatives. Everyone's seen Mad Men. That's pretty much what it was like, especially when I joined the industry in the 90s. And it's only kind of over time as this kind of new generations of creatives have come through and the faces, the people who have been in those positions of power, whether that's a creative in an ad agency or an image buyer in a corporation or, the picture editor on a media publication. It's only as those people have changed that they've started to question the folklore. And I still get that a lot. We use this type of imagery because it sells products. Or the same with photographers. I create this type of imagery because I get a lot of money doing it. And so kind of shifting that, pivoting that, it's bloody hard work. That's the only way I can describe it. It's really, really hard work. And as I said before, it's person by person by person. I'm lucky I have a global platform. I have a bit of influence and I'm trying to influence other influencers to kind of get that message out as well. But interestingly, I mean, I've just come back from the Cannes Advertising Festival, which is the big festival for advertising where everybody goes and congratulates themselves on their marvelousness. But the conversation, I can tell you, all of the big talks and all of the conversations were about diversity and inclusion, both in terms of creating advertising, but also in the people that were in advertising. So I have much optimism for the future.
Great. Georgia.
Can I just respond to what Kitty said around sort of shifting culture? I think for us, there's 2 points I wanted to make. The first is, if we take Reg's story around LGBT, we're not about smashing down barriers, because if you smash down barriers, you're never going to succeed. So we're about flexing it gently. But there's a story I want to tell you. I did a TEDx talk at the end of last year, and it was in London, and this young girl came up to me at the end, and she was from northern Nigeria but studying here, and she wanted to know if she could write for MTV Sugar, because I said we were just starting production in Nigeria, and most of our work's done in Nigeria. But as I always do, I said, please send me your work and I'll take a look at it. She sent me her work. It was remarkable. It was amazing. And I was so excited to read it. And so I immediately called her in to come and meet with me and some of the team, and just to talk about how we could sort of integrate her into our work. And she told us her story. And so she's from Kano. Her father is fairly influential over there, and she's studying here in London. She's 22, and her father has told her that it's time for her to come back home because he's found her a husband, and he wants her to go home and give him her grandchildren. And she explained to him that she wasn't ready to do that she wanted to study, and even then she wants to choose who she marries. And her father listened to her, and he said, Khadija, that's fine. He said, if you choose to do that, I respect you. He said, and it's fine because your 14-year-old sister will take your place. And so when we talk about shifting cultural barriers, Khadija has to make this choice about, does she stand up for who she wants to be, or does she respect her father and the culture that she's been brought up in? And she's somewhere in between at the moment, by the way, but she is doing some writing for us. But, so at least we can let her story be told and be heard and listened to. But none of it, even today, won't happen overnight, even after, the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. But it's a process I think we're going through.
Do you want to react to any of that? Or?
I think I agree with everything you said. I don't have anything particular to add, no?
I'm thinking that's a really good place to wrap up, but if you've got something that's very, very quick, and then we'll wrap
really
up.
quick. Great videos, absolutely inspiring. My question to Imam is, are you going to continue doing these videos? I think you should, and I think it would be a great way to tap into our younger generation that need a lot of help and support right now. I just question, and it's an observation, I live very close to Grenfell Tower, and I wondered if you came round to that area where social clubs have been closed down and funding is absolutely limited, where children are on concrete jungle estates in stairwells smoking pot. I wonder if you'd get the same response, because I see a lot of anger in the community. And I think it could be, you're onto something by engaging with our next generation that we talk about at a young age, men and women, boys and girls. Really important. Just thought I'd raise it.
Well, thanks for raising that. Actually, Grenfell is a really important story for me. I covered it. I was there the day it happened, and the following week was there every single day as a journalist, kind of thinking, I don't know what I can do here, because it was I feel like if you were not in the area when that happened, it was completely horrific. And you go to other parts of London and life was just going on as normal. And down at Grenfell, it was like the end of the world. It was just, I feel quite traumatized by it. But at that point, I wasn't sure how to tell that story. I could see journalists kind of pouncing on victims who were looking for family members, and I was thinking, I just can't do that. And I went and spoke to a young rapper from the area, from Ladbroke Grove, AJ Tracy, and he'd been in a Corbyn video the week before where Grenfell was in the background of the promotional video he was doing. And it was that point when, a lot of young people kind of getting into the political thing through Corbyn. I think a lot of that energy has been lost. But at that point, I thought I'll speak to him because he's not been directly affected. So he's not got the trauma. I don't feel like I'm, speaking to somebody who is massively vulnerable. But he represented the youth of the area, and his brother spoke as well. And speaking to them, they were so angry. You're right. There was a lot of anger that is carried on now, but it was giving the platform, because it's when you don't allow these young men or young women to speak for themselves, that's when the anger has to find somewhere else to go. You take away the clubs, you take away all of the resources, all of the things that they have, and then you take away their voices. And that was the only small thing I could do. That video, Naomi Klein, she shared it. It went really viral because the voices, they've got something to say. They can speak for themselves. They don't need journalists like me or, politicians speaking for them. They need them speaking to them and coming to find solutions with them. So, there's my kind of personal thing on Grenfell, and I would really like to keep doing more things around Grenfell. I was at the march, actually, the anniversary one on the 14th. It was really powerful. But I also think that even where there's anger, there's so much, like the young people all over the world, but, particularly in London, because I'm a Londoner, I'm just like, there's so much that they've got to say about what their problems are. And I would like to continue doing this series, yes. If anyone would like to share the videos and kind of add to the kind of buzz around it, that'd be great. But part of also what I'm doing is speaking to, on the other side, Jordan Peterson fans, going there as well, kind of talking to all different kinds of groups of people. And so I would really like to continue speaking to young people, people maybe a bit more on the right. And I'm open to any suggestions if anybody wants to contact me on social media.
Well, that can be done over the reception. Thank you very much.